We continue this series of sermons on Paul's letter to the Philippians and come now finally to the end of chapter 2 in Philippians, verses 25 through 30. A little bit of a story about a character in the New Testament named Epaphroditus. Listen now for the word of God. Paul speaking to the Philippians. Still, I think it is necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and co-worker and fellow soldier, your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for all of you and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. He was indeed so ill that he nearly died. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, so that I would not have one sorrow after another. I am the more eager to send him, therefore, in order that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. Welcome him, then, in the Lord with all joy and honor such people. Because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for those services you could not give me. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I wonder how many of you have ever heard a sermon on Epaphroditus? No, didn't think so. I haven't either. In fact, I've done a little test asking many pastors who've been pastors and preachers for a long time, who represent collectively hundreds of years of experience in preaching, and not one of them has ever preached a sermon on Epaphroditus. I think there's a reason. It's almost impossible to say the name. Try it. Say it with me. Epaphroditus. Oh, come on, you can do better than that. Epaphroditus. Now imagine trying to say that 10 times fast. Actually, you guys did a great job. You have a great choir here, Jeff. Wonderful diction. I hope you tried it at home. Epaphroditus. Now I can tell you, if I weren't doing this series on Philippians, I might never have preached a sermon on Epaphroditus. The name actually sounds a little like an illness, don't you think? What have you got? An inflamed Epaphroditus, or an aggravated Epaphroditus, or what is your name, Epaphroditus? I'm sorry, how long have you had that? Epaphroditus must have dealt with that a lot. Imagine naming your own child Epaphroditus. But actually, it was a very common name in its time, in that part of the world. In fact, you will find this name in many ancient manuscripts and papyri. So just imagine a lot of little Epaphroditus running around and parents yelling out, "Epaphroditus, it's time to come home for dinner. Epaphroditus, where are you?" And half the neighborhood looked up and bolted for home. The actual meaning of the name Epaphroditus is charming, or lovely, or handsome. Why? Because hidden inside it is, like a delicate spice or a painting within a painting, is the name of the goddess Aphrodite, which is very interesting. It's caused some scholars to think that Epaphroditus' parents named their child this because they worshiped this goddess. Who knows? No one really knows. But Epaphroditus' name means charming one, lovely one, handsome one. But there was so much more to Epaphroditus than his name, just as there is more to people with whom you live or work, more behind that face, more to the story, more joy, more pain, more sunshine, more rain than you will ever know until you really get to know the other person. There is more to Epaphroditus than his name. Two things come to mind. First of all, he was a man of sorrows, like Jesus, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Now, we've already established that his name sounds a little bit like an illness, which is very appropriate because, according to Paul, he was very ill. He was very sick, nearly to death. Have you ever been that way, that close to death yourself? Or maybe you've known someone who walked right up to death's door and just before walking through it, retreated back. You ever known anyone like that? My father was like that. He beat cancer, beat lymphoma 3 different times with radiation and chemo, and he was in remission for 20 years after the 3rd time, and something else finally took him at the age of 94. We have a parishioner who went in for a test last week, was very nervous about it, but then called me and said, "It's okay, I'm going to be all right. The cancer is in remission." I said, "That's great." And she said, "You know, something you said really helped me." And I said, "Really? What was that?" You said you didn't think God was finished with me yet. And then you added, "And you're much too ornery for heaven. In fact, St. Peter will probably turn you away." She said that wasn't the most pastoral or comforting thing, but actually it helped. And it was true, because God isn't finished with me yet. Epaphroditus stepped to the very edge and stared over into the abyss of his own mortality, which is what all of us do at memorial services and funerals. But when you come close to death, you do stare into that abyss of mortality, because he nearly died. Now, physicians today speculate on what was the problem with him. Well, there were dozens of diseases that swept through Rome in those days, ancient versions of coronavirus that were incurable, and they didn't know what to do, but some people survived, some people didn't. And some think that this is maybe some psychic illness, like Paul's thorn in the flesh, who knows. He had another problem, though, and that he was worried about his Philippian friends who had heard that he was sick, and he didn't know how to tell them, because, you know, they had no email then, no texting, no telephone, no way to communicate clearly with one another, quickly with one another. You had to wait for a courier to bring the news. And in the Greco-Roman world, when you heard that someone was sick, you assumed that that person would die. So his friends in Philippi were worried sick about him. They didn't know what to do. So Paul is now sending Epaphroditus to give them the news that he's going to be okay. It's all going to be fine. You know how your mind just imagines the worst when you haven't heard any news? When our younger son, David, was in grade school and would go to summer camp, Jane would give him a little stack of self-addressed and pre-stamped, postcards for him to put in the mail. All he had to do was sign them and put them in the mail, because they said, "Yes, Mom, I'm still alive, having a great time, and see you soon." And he did that dutifully. It was wonderful to hear from him with those little postcards. Through college and graduate school, there would be times when we just didn't hear from him for a while. Then every once in a while, he would send an email or call and say, "Yes, Mom, I'm still alive." And that's what Epaphroditus is doing through this little message, through Paul's letter. He's saying to his beloved Philippian friends, "Yes, Mom, I'm still alive." So he was a man of sorrows, like Jesus, acquainted with grief, but he was not weighed down by his grief. Not at all. In fact, he's trying to communicate with his beloved friends in Philippi. He's trying to help them understand that he's okay now. It's going to be all right. They can quit worrying about him. It reminds me of terminal patients I have visited who are at peace. They are so at peace at the very end, in the presence of their own imminent passing, that they will actually fuss at me as I gather in a death watch around their bed. What are you doing here? Don't you have a sermon to work on? Get out of here. Go be with your family. I'm going to be all right because you know what? I'm about to see Jesus, and it's okay. This has happened numerous times. And this is what Epaphroditus is trying to say to his Philippian friends. I'm going to be okay. I am okay. It's all right. You don't have to worry about me. Now, you see, both Paul and Epaphroditus are not anything like Jesus, they're not anything like other people who are constantly griping and complaining. People who are worrying about their own health. There's an organization, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called Hypochondriacs for Christ. Have you all ever heard of that one? Yeah. You know what their epitaph is when they die? I told you I was sick. But these guys, you see, Paul and Epaphroditus are not like that at all. They are not griping and complaining. Epaphroditus is a man of sorrows like Jesus, acquainted with grief, but not weighed down by the grief, not worrying about his own impending death. The second point is a shorter point, and it is that he is also a man who makes a difference wherever he is. That's what he's doing. You see it in this story. You see it in the words that Paul says to the Philippians. He is here with me. Epaphroditus has been here. He's been ministering to me. He is helping me. Now, part of Epaphroditus' problem was he was homesick. He was missing, like the prodigal son, he was missing his family and his friends, and he was glad to go back and be with them. But Paul is saying, look, he's been here with me. He's not been griping or complaining. He's been in prison here with me. He's been helping me. And he, in fact, has risked his very life to be here with me in this place. Now, there's a really big, long Greek word that's used for this. It's only used in this one place in the New Testament. It's parabouleomai, and it really means risking your life, exposing yourself. And it described early Christians who, when a big plague would sweep through Rome, would nurse those and care for the sick who had fever. They would risk their very lives to be with people who had caught some great virus. Sound familiar? In 252 AD or CE, the Common Era, a plague broke out in Carthage that swept through the city. The heathens just threw the bodies into a pit and fled in terror, but Cyprian, according to Barclay, Cyprian, the Christian bishop, gathered the congregation and they began to give their dead proper burials. And they began to nurse the ones who were sick, risking their very lives, but they saved this plague-ridden city from definite destruction and desolation. Does that also sound familiar? This morning, we need to thank God for all physicians, all doctors, all nurses, all healthcare providers who are risking their very lives in an all-out war that is attacking our world and our country. They are risking their lives to save the lives of those who are fighting. Paul says nothing can separate us from the love of Christ, not peril or famine or nakedness or sword. No, in all things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Thanks be to God for the Epaphroditus of our time who are risking their lives to save our lives. Thanks be to God for every single one of them. And to God be the glory from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all.